What happens when a beloved actress sits down for what should be a friendly morning chat and instead finds herself under attack from a host who seems determined to tear her down? In just 38 seconds, one comment would expose the true nature of a television personality millions thought they knew, and what followed was a clash so intense that it ended with security being called and a guest being physically removed from the studio. This is the story of how Julie Walters, one of Britain's most cherished actresses, walked onto a morning talk show expecting a pleasant conversation about her latest work, and instead found herself in a battle for her dignity against a host who had apparently woken up that day and chosen chaos. The morning started like any other on the show. The lights were bright, the audience was settled in their seats, and the cameras were rolling. Lorraine Kelly sat in her usual spot, smiling that familiar smile that had welcomed countless guests over the years. But something was different today. There was an edge to her energy, a sharpness that those who knew her well might have recognized as a warning sign. Julie Walters walked onto the set to warm applause. She was there to talk about her new film, a project she had poured her heart into. She sat down, smoothed her dress, and prepared for what she assumed would be the standard questions. How was filming? What drew you to the role? Tell us something funny that happened on set. The usual comfortable territory of morning television. Lorraine began pleasantly enough. She welcomed Julie, complimented her outfit, and made a joke about the weather. The audience laughed. Everything seemed normal. But then, barely a minute into the interview, something shifted. Lorraine leaned forward and said, with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes, "So Julie, let me ask you something. Your career has had its ups and downs, hasn't it? More downs recently, some might say." The audience went quiet. Julie blinked, clearly caught off guard. She let out a small laugh, the kind people do when they are not sure if someone is joking or not. She replied, "Well, I have been fortunate to work steadily over the years. I feel very lucky." But Lorraine was not backing down. She pressed on, her voice taking on a tone that was almost mocking. "Lucky? Is that what we are calling it? Because I've seen some of your recent films and, well, let me be honest here. They have not exactly set the box office on fire, have they?" Julie's smile faltered. She shifted in her seat. The audience members exchanged uncomfortable glances. This was not the warm, fuzzy morning television they had signed up for. This was something else entirely. "I think," Julie said carefully, "that success can be measured in different ways. Not every film needs to make £100 million to be worthwhile. Some stories are important because of what they say, not how much money they make." Lorraine laughed, but it was a cold sound. "Oh, that is a lovely way to spin it. That is what actors always say when their films flop, is it not? It was never about the money. It was about the art." Meanwhile, the rest of us are wondering why we paid £12 to sit through 2 hours of, well, let me not be too harsh. The tension in the studio was now impossible to ignore. Julie was no longer smiling. She sat up straighter, her jaw set. She said, "I am sorry. Are we here to talk about my new film, or are you just planning to insult me for the next 10 minutes? Lorraine waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so sensitive. I'm just being honest. That is what people love about this show. I tell it like it is. And the truth is, Julie, you are not the draw you used to be. When was the last time you were in something that really mattered? Something people actually talked about?" Julie took a deep breath. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. She said, her voice steady despite the obvious hurt, "I have been working in this industry for over 40 years. I have been in films that have touched millions of people. I have worked with some of the greatest directors and actors of our time. I do not need to justify my career to you or anyone else." But Lorraine was relentless. She leaned back in her chair, looking almost pleased with herself. 40 years, yes. And maybe that is the problem. Maybe you have been around too long. Maybe it is time to step aside and let some fresh faces have a go. Because, and I mean this with all due respect, you are looking a bit tired these days. A bit past it, if I'm being completely honest. The audience gasped. Someone in the front row said, "Oh my God," loud enough for the microphones to pick it up. Julie's face went pale, then flushed red. Her hands were shaking now. She said, her voice tight with controlled anger, "That is an incredibly cruel thing to say. What is wrong with you? Why are you being like this?" Lorraine shrugged, still wearing that awful smile. "I am just saying what everyone else is thinking. You are a lovely person, I am sure. But maybe it is time to accept that your moment has passed. There is no shame in that. Well, maybe a little shame, but you will get over it." Julie stood up abruptly. Her microphone pack nearly pulled loose. She said, "I am not doing this. I came here to have a conversation, not to be attacked by someone who clearly has some kind of personal issue with me. This is disgraceful. Lorraine stood up too, her voice rising. Oh, sit down, Julie. Do not be so dramatic. This is live television. You cannot just walk off whenever someone says something you do not like. That is not how this works. Watch me, Julie shot back. She started to remove her microphone, fumbling with the wire. A production assistant rushed forward to help, looking panicked. Lorraine stepped closer, pointing a finger at Julie. You are being completely unprofessional right now. Do you know how many people would kill to be on this show? And you are throwing a tantrum like a child just because I asked you a few tough questions. Tough questions? Julie's voice was loud now, echoing through the studio. You called me washed up. You said I looked tired and passed it. Those are not tough questions. That is just you being nasty for no reason. What did I ever do to you? The two women were now face to face, both visibly angry. The audience sat in stunned silence. The cameras kept rolling. This was no longer an interview. This was a full-blown confrontation. Lorraine said, her voice dripping with condescension. You want to know what you did? You have been coasting on your reputation for years. You show up, collect your paycheck, and phone in performances that a first-year drama student could do better. And then you have the nerve to act like you are some kind of national treasure. It is insulting to people who actually work hard. Julie's eyes filled with tears, but her voice was strong. How dare you? How dare you stand there and question my work ethic? I have given everything to my craft. I have worked on projects that paid nothing because I believed in the story. I have mentored young actors. I have fought for roles for women my age when the industry wanted to throw us away. And you? Sitting in your comfortable chair, making millions by asking celebrities what they had for breakfast? You think you can judge me? Lorraine's face twisted with rage. Get off my show. Right now. Get out. I am already leaving, Julie said. She had her microphone off now and handed it to the terrified production assistant. This show is a joke, and you are a bully. I hope everyone watching sees you for what you really are. Security, Lorraine shouted. Someone get her out of here. Two security guards appeared from the wings, looking deeply uncomfortable. One of them said quietly, Ma'am, we need you to leave the studio. Julie looked at them with dignity and said, I understand. I am going. She turned back to Lorraine one last time. You should be ashamed of yourself. The cameras captured everything as Julie Walters walked off the set, her head held high despite the tears streaming down her face. The audience sat in shocked silence. Lorraine stood there, breathing hard, her carefully constructed television persona shattered into a million pieces. And somewhere in the control room, a producer was frantically trying to figure out how to cut to a commercial break, knowing full well that what had just happened would be replayed and analyzed and talked about for years to come. This was not just a bad interview. This was a career-defining moment, and not in a good way. But the confrontation was far from over. As Julie moved towards the exit, Lorraine's voice cut through the studio like a knife. You know what your problem is, Julie? You cannot handle the truth. You have been surrounded by yes people for so long that you have forgotten what real criticism sounds like. Julie stopped walking. She stood there for a moment, her back to Lorraine, and you could see her shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath. Then she turned around slowly. The security guards froze, unsure of what to do. The entire studio held its breath. Julie walked back towards the set, not in a threatening way, but with the kind of calm determination that somehow felt more powerful than any show of aggression. She stopped a few feet from Lorraine and said, You want to talk about truth? Let me tell you some truth. I came here today as a favor. Your producers begged my agent for weeks because your ratings have been dropping and you needed a name to bring viewers back. I said yes because I thought it would be a nice, easy conversation. I was wrong. Lorraine's face went red. That is not, she started to say, but Julie held up a hand. I am not finished. You sit here every morning and you smile and you laugh and you pretend to be everyone's friend. But the moment the cameras are off, the moment you think no one is paying attention, you are rude to your staff. You are dismissive to guests who you do not think are important enough. I have heard the stories, Lorraine. Everyone in this industry has heard the stories. And now I am living one. The audience was completely silent. Some people had their phones out, recording. This was the kind of moment that would be shared 1,000,000 times before the day was over. Lorraine tried to speak again, but her voice came out weak. I have always been professional. Julie laughed, but there was no humor in it. Professional? You called me washed up on live television. You mocked my appearance. You suggested I should retire, and you think that is professional? What you are is jealous. Jealous that I have had a career based on talent and hard work, while you have built yours on being cruel to people who cannot fight back. That is enough, Lorraine said, her voice shaking now. You need to leave. Now. Julie nodded slowly. Oh, I am leaving. But first, I want everyone watching to know something. This woman right here, she is not your friend. She does not care about you or your stories or your lives. You are just numbers to her, ratings. And the moment you stop being useful, she will turn on you just like she turned on me today. Lorraine looked like she wanted to say something devastating in return, but the words would not come. Her mouth opened and closed. She looked around at her crew, at the audience, and seemed to realize for the first time that she had lost control of the situation entirely. This was supposed to be her show, her kingdom, but somehow Julie had taken all the power. One of the security guards stepped forward again and said gently, "Miss Walters, please, we really do need you to go now." Julie looked at him and smiled sadly. "I know. I am sorry you have to be part of this." She glanced one more time at Lorraine. "I really am sorry for you. I cannot imagine being so unhappy inside that the only way you can feel better is by making other people feel small. I hope you get the help you need." That statement seemed to hit Lorraine harder than any of the anger or accusations. Her face crumpled for just a second before she caught herself. She said, her voice barely above a whisper, "Get out of my studio." "It is not your studio," Julie said quietly. "It belongs to the network. You just work here. And after today, I would not be surprised if they start wondering whether you are worth the trouble." The security guards began to guide Julie towards the exit again. This time she went willingly. But as she walked, she spoke loudly enough for everyone to hear. "To everyone in this audience, to everyone watching at home, I want you to know that you deserve better than this. You deserve kindness. You deserve respect. Do not let anyone treat you the way I was treated today. Not your boss, not your friends, not anyone. You are worth more than that." The audience began to applaud. It started with one person, then two, then suddenly the entire studio was clapping. Some people were even standing. They were applauding Julie, not Lorraine. The host who had just tried to humiliate and destroy her guest was now watching that guest receive a standing ovation. Lorraine's face went through a series of emotions: shock, anger, embarrassment, and finally something that looked almost like panic. She turned to the cameras and tried to regain control. "Well, that was certainly," she paused, searching for words. "That was unexpected. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back," but the director in the control room had already made the decision to cut away. The feed switched to a commercial, but not before millions of viewers had witnessed the entire ugly confrontation. Social media was already exploding. Clips were being shared. Think pieces were being written in real time. The phone lines at the network were lighting up. Backstage, Julie was being escorted through the corridors. Crew members who had watched the whole thing on monitors stopped her to shake her hand, to hug her, to tell her she was incredible. One makeup artist said, with tears in her eyes, "Thank you for saying what we have all been thinking for years. She has been awful to work with, and nobody has ever stood up to her like that." Julie hugged her and said, "You should never have to put up with that kind of behavior. None of you should." Meanwhile, back on the set, Lorraine was having what could only be described as a meltdown. During the commercial break, with the studio audience still there watching, she turned on her producers. "How could you let this happen? Why did nobody step in? You just let her attack me on my own show." One brave producer tried to respond. "Lorraine, you were the one who started it. You were incredibly harsh with her from the beginning. We tried to signal you to pull back, but you kept going." Lorraine spun around. "So this is my fault? Is that what you are saying? She comes on here with her attitude and her superiority complex, and somehow I am the bad guy?" Another producer, older and clearly tired of the drama, said bluntly, "Yes, that is exactly what we are saying. You crossed a line today, multiple lines, and it was all captured on camera. This is going to be a problem, a big problem." The stage manager interrupted. "We are back in 30 seconds. Lorraine ran her hands through her hair, trying to compose herself. She turned to her makeup artist. "Fix my face. I look terrible." The makeup artist, who had been with the show for 5 years, said coldly, "There is only so much I can do." And then she walked away, leaving Lorraine standing there with her mouth open in shock. The cameras came back on. Lorraine was alone on the set now. The chair where Julie had been sitting was empty, a stark reminder of what had just happened. Lorraine tried to smile, but it came out more like a grimace. "Well," she said, her voice artificially bright, "that was certainly not how I expected this morning to go. Julie Walters, ladies and gentlemen, always full of surprises." She laughed, but nobody in the audience laughed with her. The silence was deafening. She pushed forward, trying desperately to salvage something. "Look, sometimes interviews get heated. Sometimes people disagree. That is the nature of live television. But at the end of the day, I have nothing but respect for Julie and her work. I think maybe we both got a bit carried away there, but it was too late. The damage was done. Everyone watching could see through the attempted backpedaling. Everyone knew what they had witnessed. This was not a case of two people getting carried away. This was a clear case of one person attacking another and then facing consequences when the victim refused to play along. Lorraine tried to continue the show as if nothing had happened, but everything felt wrong. Her next guest, a chef who was supposed to demonstrate how to make the perfect Sunday roast, sat down looking distinctly uncomfortable. Before Lorraine could even ask the first question, the chef said, "I have to be honest. That was really hard to watch. Are you okay?" Lorraine blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "I'm fine. Absolutely fine. Now, shall we talk about your recipe?" But the chef was not letting it go, because it seemed like you were really going after her. Julie Walters is a legend. What she said about kindness and respect really resonated with me. I think we could all learn something from that. The color drained from Lorraine's face. She had not anticipated that her own guests would turn on her too, she said, her voice tight. "I appreciate your thoughts, but we are here to talk about cooking, not about," she waved her hand vaguely, "earlier segments." "Right," the chef said, nodding slowly. "Of course. But I just want to say, for the record, I think you owe her an apology. That is all I will say about it." Lorraine's smile was now completely frozen on her face. She looked like a wax figure of herself. She pushed through the cooking segment, but her questions were distracted and half-formed. She kept glancing at the studio audience, perhaps hoping to see friendly faces. But instead, she saw people whispering to each other, checking their phones, and generally looking anywhere but at her. When the segment ended and they cut to another commercial, Lorraine stood up abruptly and walked off the set without a word to anyone. The chef sat there alone, looking around awkwardly until a producer came to escort him away. The audience members began talking amongst themselves, their voices growing louder. One woman in the third row said to her friend, "I cannot believe we just witnessed that. I've been watching this show for 10 years, and I have never seen anything like it." Her friend replied, "I know, and honestly, I am done with it. I am never watching again." The way she spoke to Julie was disgusting. There is no excuse for that. Similar conversations were happening all around the studio. People were not just shocked, they were angry. They felt like they had been complicit in something ugly, and they did not like it. Backstage, Lorraine had locked herself in her dressing room. Her assistant knocked gently on the door. "Lorraine, the network executives are on the phone. They need to speak with you." "Tell them I am busy," Lorraine shouted back. "They say it is urgent. It is about what just happened." "I said I am busy." There was a pause. Then the assistant said quietly, "They are talking about pulling you off air. They want you to make a statement." That got Lorraine's attention. She yanked the door open. "What do you mean, pulling me off air? This is my show. They cannot do that." The assistant, a young woman who had put up with Lorraine's temper for 2 years, said with surprising firmness, "They can do whatever they want. You went after Julie Walters on live television. The phones have not stopped ringing. Social media is a nightmare. Everyone is calling you a bully. They need to do damage control, and if that means you sit out a few shows, then that is what they will do." Lorraine stared at her assistant like she had never really seen her before. "When did you grow a spine?" she asked, her voice dripping with venom. The assistant smiled sadly. "About 5 minutes ago, when I watched Julie Walters stand up for herself, she made me realize something. I do not have to take your abuse either. I quit." She turned and walked away, leaving Lorraine standing in the doorway with her mouth hanging open. For perhaps the first time in her career, Lorraine was completely alone. No assistant, no adoring audience, no guests laughing at her jokes. Just her and the consequences of her actions. Back in the studio, the show was attempting to continue with a substitute host, a news anchor who had been pulled in at the last minute. He sat in Lorraine's chair, looking deeply uncomfortable, and tried to introduce the next segment. But before he could finish his sentence, someone in the audience stood up. It was an older woman, probably in her 60s. She said in a clear, strong voice, "I am sorry, but I need to say something. We all saw what happened here today. We saw how Julie Walters was treated, and I think we all need to acknowledge that what we witnessed was bullying. Plain and simple. That woman," and she pointed to Lorraine's empty chair, "should not be allowed back on television until she understands the harm she caused." The substitute host did not know what to do. He looked to the producers for guidance, but they were just as lost. Another audience member stood up, then another. Soon, half the audience was on their feet. A man in his 40s said, "My daughter watches this show." She looked up to Lorraine. "How am I supposed to explain to her what we just saw? How do I tell her that someone she admired is actually cruel?" A younger woman added, "I came here today so excited to be in the audience. I thought this would be fun. Instead, I feel sick. I feel like I just watched someone get torn apart for entertainment. That is not okay." The substitute host held up his hands. "I understand everyone is upset. The network will be making a statement. But right now, I think we need to take a break." "No," someone else shouted. "No more breaks. No more pretending everything is fine. We deserve answers. Where is she? Where is Lorraine?" The chanting started small but grew quickly. "Where is Lorraine? Where is Lorraine?" The producers were panicking now, making frantic calls, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. But there was no controlling this. The audience had seen behind the curtain, and they did not like what they found. In her dressing room, Lorraine could hear the chanting through the walls. She sat on her couch, staring at nothing, as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. Her phone was buzzing constantly with calls and messages, but she could not bring herself to look at it. She knew what they would say. She knew what everyone was saying. There was another knock at her door. "Lorraine, it was one of the senior producers. We need you to come out and make a statement. This is getting out of hand." Lorraine said nothing. "Lorraine, please. The audience is about to riot. We have security concerned. You need to fix this." "Fix this?" Lorraine's voice was hollow. "How am I supposed to fix this? You could start with an apology. A real one, not the half-hearted thing you tried earlier. You need to own what you did." Lorraine stood up and opened the door. The producer took a step back at the sight of her. Her makeup was smeared. Her hair was a mess. She looked 10 years older than she had at the start of the show. She said, her voice barely a whisper, "I cannot go back out there." "You have to. This is your show, your responsibility." Lorraine shook her head slowly. "It stopped being my show the moment I attacked Julie. It became hers. She won, and I lost. Everything." The producer wanted to argue, but looking at Lorraine's face, he realized there was no point. She was broken. Whatever happened next, Lorraine Kelly, as everyone knew her, was finished. Meanwhile, Julie Walters had made it back to her car. Her driver, who had been watching the whole thing on his phone, looked at her with something like awe. "Miss Walters, that was incredible. You were amazing in there." Julie smiled tiredly. "I do not feel amazing. I feel exhausted and sad. I never wanted any of that to happen." "You did not make it happen," the driver said firmly. "She did. You just stood up for yourself. And from what I'm seeing online, the entire country is on your side." Julie looked out the window as they pulled away from the studio. She thought about Lorraine, alone in her dressing room, facing the destruction of everything she had built. Part of Julie felt sorry for her, but a larger part, the part that had been humiliated and attacked on live television, felt that justice had been served. Sometimes, Julie thought, people need to face consequences. Sometimes kindness means standing up to cruelty, even when it is hard, even when it is painful. She had spent her entire career being gracious and professional, even in the face of difficult situations. But today she had drawn a line, and she was proud of that. The car drove on through the city streets, carrying Julie away from the chaos she had left behind. While back at the studio, Lorraine Kelly sat alone, finally understanding that her words had consequences, that her cruelty had a price, and that sometimes, when you push someone too far, they push back harder than you ever imagined possible.